Senator Canavan, in continuation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and it's a great honour to kick off 2016 with the first contribution. I'm in continuation from a speech I think I gave back in May last year, so forgive me if I'm a bit rusty on some of the details of this bill. I did have a lovely break with the family over Christmas, and during that break I've forgotten most of what was in the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Legislation Amendment Exit Arrangements Bill 2015, but I have swatted up on it this morning, and I'm ready to make a further contribution on this very important bill. It's rather an administrative and process-driven bill, but nonetheless it's important because it's about ensuring ultimately that we have a more financially robust, a more financially sound way of ensuring people who are injured at work receive appropriate compensation. As I'm sure you're aware, Mr. President, the Comcare scheme is the Australian government scheme to help and rehabilitate workers who are injured in largely Commonwealth workplaces. But other agencies can be members of this scheme. Some Commonwealth agencies have their own arrangements and are not members of the Comcare scheme. And the ACT has previously had an arrangement where it is a member of this scheme for the purposes of its employees, and it's defined as a Commonwealth agency for that purpose. Now, largely this bill, the need for this bill and the amendments to the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act have been brought about because the ACT has made a decision to leave this scheme, which is their right. They, as I say, have been previously a member of the scheme, but they have decided that it was too costly, that there were too many delays, and they're going to establish or seek their own arrangements for their own public servants and employees. That is perfectly their right to do so, and this decision was announced last February. On 26th of February, the Canberra Times reported that the ACT government would be leaving the Comcare scheme, and because of that, the Commonwealth government has made a decision that it's important to ensure the continuing financial viability of the Comcare scheme, notwithstanding the ACT leaving, because many of the employees or former employees who require compensation of the scheme were formerly or are ACT public servants. And of course, with the ACT government leaving the scheme, there'll be fewer premiums going forward to fund those costs. Indeed, my understanding is that the ACT is the fourth largest premium payer in the Comcare scheme, so it's a sizeable contributor to the overall budget, and given the sizeable number of ACT public servants, it would also be a sizeable number of those under compensation through the Comcare scheme. So it leaving will leave a financial burden for Comcare, and it's very important we maintain its financial viability. So to do so, the government has proposed providing arrangements for an exit fee for members who would seek to exit the Comcare scheme, so that in this case for the ACT, when they do exit, a fee will be calculated based on the actuarial value of the future commitments for those former ACT public servants and their compensation needs. That fee will be calculated, and the ACT government would pay to leave the scheme. It is not a particularly novel approach to these arrangements. I made the point, I think, back in May that we have similar arrangements for irrigators who leave an irrigation scheme without paying or amortising the full cost of the network when they leave. They've got to pay an exit fee so that the rest of the irrigators aren't left with those costs. The same arrangements here. The ACT government would be asked to pay a fee such that all the other Commonwealth agencies aren't asked to pick up the bill for ACT government employees. It is also something that exists in other parts of the country. While this is the first time we'll establish such an arrangement for the Commonwealth workplace compensation arrangements, in my understanding is in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Queensland and in South Australia, all of their workplace compensation arrangements allow for an exit fee to be charged to agencies or organisations that leave their schemes under similar arrangements to what we are proposing. So it's perfectly sensible approach to this particular issue that has arisen through the ACT decision. While it's the first time we'll set up an ongoing and committed and generic arrangement for exit fees. The Commonwealth Parliament has previously established similar arrangements when Medibank Private was privatised and it left the Comcare scheme. A fee was calculated for it, and special legislation at the time was agreed to by the Australian Parliament to fund, or to establish the authority, I should say, to levy that fee. So what we are doing here is simply repeating that approach, but not doing something specific for the ACT government, but instead setting up a process which would apply if any future payer, currently Comcare premium payer, decided to leave the Comcare scheme. The Senate committee has looked at this as well. The Senate Committee on Education and Employment, chaired by my colleague Senator Mackenzie, has looked at this issue. It's decided we should, or it's recommended we should pass this particular scheme. It has noted in that report that the current Comcare scheme is actually not fully financially funded. It's not fully funded right now because of over time premiums weren't set based on actuarial values in the past. Premiums into the scheme didn't fully cover the costs of workplace injuries. However, there is a slight improvement over the past year. I believe it had 68% of funds available of what was measured as the actuarial funds needed. Around 68% were covered. I believe that's gone up above 70% in the past year. But there's still a sizable unfunded gap there, and given that gap, we can't afford to have that gap grow by not appropriately levying the ACT government for the ongoing costs imposed on the Comcare scheme by leaving, and of course no longer paying premiums for its employees or its workplace employees who have been injured. Now, as I said, the Senate committee in its majority report recommended the bill be passed. However, I do note that Labor senators on that committee did not quite agree. I don't believe they made a recommendation, but Labor senators did say in their report that, as such, Labor senators urged the government to request the ACT government provides written assurances to ensure workers will not be worse off. And what it was going to was that the ACTU made a submission to that inquiry saying that the new ACT compensation scheme, workplace compensation scheme that could be established, may not fully compensate workers for their industries to the same level as the Comcare scheme does. Well, as the government has said in response to that, that is a matter for the ACT government, is not a matter for the Commonwealth government. The Comcare scheme was not established to take care of ACT government employees. It was set up to allow the ACT government to have access to a well-funded and deeply liquid pool of workplace insurance to meet its required needs, and needs that it would establish, not that it's our job to establish. So it's perfectly up to the ACT government. It's not the Commonwealth government's responsibility to decide how the ACT wants to particularly deal and fund workplace industries in its own workplaces. We had this option available as a product. The ACT government has decided not to buy our product going forward. That is their right, but it's not our job to try and double guess what they want to do over the other side of the lake here in the Legislative Assembly. Now, what was also a little bit unusual and perplexing about the Labor senators' recommendation here, that we request the ACT government to provide such assurances, is that, as I said earlier, the ACT government made this decision on the 26th, well, it was announced at least on the 26th of February last year. Now, as many senators would be aware, at the time the ACT government Chief Minister was one Miss Katie Gallagher, who is now a Labor senator in this place. Now, Labor senators are saying that a decision made by that ACT government in February last year was insufficient and denied workers their proper rights. Well, instead of asking the ACT government, couldn't they just ask their colleague, Senator Gallagher? That would be a suggestion for the Labor Party if they've got concerns about this. If they've got concerns about the decision that the ACT government made last February, surely they could ask the former Chief Minister who made that decision, who signed off on that decision last February. Last February they signed off on that decision, and that was a decision made by Ms Katie Gallagher, and I make no particular complaint about that decision. I don't know the specifics of what the ACT government had to consider when they decided to leave the Comcare scheme, but they made a considered decision to do so, and now Ms Katie Gallagher is now Senator Gallagher for the ACT, And surely, if they wanted an explanation about the decision-making of the ACT government, they could go to their own senator. Now, what to me this indicates is not that the Labor Party has some principled objection to the arrangements that are being put in place here, which, as I said, are rather technical and replicated over the rest of the country. It's simply that they want to oppose everything that is put up by this government. They don't want to do anything that may be constructive and forward-moving for our country, as limited as this particular issue is. They are simply on the lookout for particular political differences that they can abuse and take advantage of for political purposes, not for the national interest purposes. And that, to me, needs to be called out, because really, why are they opposing this bill? Is it because the ACTU have said so and they've made a submission against it? Is it because somehow they don't, some of them see Senator Gallagher as a threat to their future positions or some such? He's just been promoted recently. Is that the reason? Why are they opposing it? Why are they opposing it? A state or a territory government, in this instance, has done this. A territory government of their own political colour has decided to do this, and they're still opposing it because this is a legislative amendment being done after and as a consequence of that decision, but by a Liberal National government, not by a Labor government. That's why they are opposing this. Now, I know they seem to like to pick fights with state and territory governments at the moment, the Federal Labor Party. They're warring with at least one other state Labor government at the moment in South Australia about their confused position on how to fund policies. They are having a complete, it's World War III between South Australia and the Federal Labor Party at the moment over the GST. But you would think they'd get their story straight on at least as something as administrative as workplace compensation arrangements, and they can't even do that. They will oppose everything we put up. And I think later this afternoon or this evening in this chamber we'll debate a motion about that we haven't changed, that the Liberal National Party hasn't changed. And we haven't changed because we are continuing to provide good government. We're continuing to make decisions like this in the interests of the nation. And it's the Labor Party also hasn't changed because 2016 might have ticked over and a new year might have ticked over, but it's the same Labor Party opposing everything we put up. It's the same Labor Party simply wanting to make political points, not deal with issues on a national and overall interest. They're just opposing everything that a coalition government does, and they're good at negativity, but they're not good on policy. And that is what their approach here is today. And hopefully, maybe I'm being too pessimistic, Mr. President. Perhaps I should be less cynical in the first contribution here in this chamber. Maybe I should be more positive, and I did say I'd turn over a new leaf on a few things that I go about. So maybe I should give them a bit more of a fair go. And perhaps the next speaker on this bill will get up and say the Labor Party's reconsidered over the break, they've turned over a new leaf, they've made a New Year's resolution not just to simply reflexively oppose everything, and they'll come out and support this bill because it's pretty simple and technical and administrative. It happens in other states. You should get behind it and support it. Perhaps that's what they'll do. That's what they'll do. It's a new year, it's a new opportunity. Hopefully they've made some more New Year's resolutions like the rest of us, and perhaps that's what they'll do. And if they do, I'll have to come to this place, I'll have to eat humble pie, and I'll have to say, no, the Labor Party have turned over a new leaf, they're going to support this. The next step, maybe they support some more transparency and oversight of trade unions that have shown themselves to be completely worried about their own back pockets, not their workers' interests. That'll be their next step, hopefully, that they'll join us in making sure we reform those arrangements. The next step might be actually joining us on how to fix our budget situation, which is still far too negative. We need to do more on that front, but the Labor Party produced no suggestions to help fund budget repair over the longer term. Perhaps they'll join us on a proper tax reform debate rather than going around and eating lettuces and annoying mums and dads in supermarkets and running a ridiculous scare campaign. Perhaps they'll do that as well. But I'm sorry, Mr. President, despite it being a new year, I'm not that hopeful. I'm not that hopeful that the Labor Party will be dragged that far. But let's just hold our breath. Let's just hope that they will reconsider, that they will join the coalition government here, the Liberal Party, the National Party, many of the crossbenchers, at times the Greens, who join us to help actually get something done for this country and move this place forward. As I said, this is not a nation-changing issue in front of this parliament. This is not going to, one way or another, be a watershed moment for our Commonwealth, but it's a small example of how a reflexively negative approach stops us from making the little decisions that add up to be a better place and a better government and a better governance for our whole nation. So I implore the Labor Party, implore other senators to look at detail in this bill. It's a sensible bill. It builds on what is already a good scheme in Comcare. It uses other states as examples to what should be done in this scheme, and it will help make sure that we have a sounder financial footing for what is a very important scheme, and will help ensure that we can continue to pay those unfortunate workers who are injured while at work for the